What is going on, everyone? Hey, it's good to have you guys back for another episode of Corner Talk. I'm excited for what God has in store today. And without further ado, the one and only, the legend, the man, the myth, the dude himself, Pastor Evan Havens.
Wow, that's quite an introduction. Thank you for that. I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Dude, absolutely. What I like is the way that I kind of introed into that was like the man, the myth, the legend, Evan Havens. Like it was building up, and then we kind of brought it back down for the dramatic effect.
I like that.
The idea of this is about to be the best pod in all podcast.
Wow, that's a lot to live up to, but let's do it.
You know, I've actually never called a podcast a pod, and I don't know why, but it kind of just feels like not right calling it like, hey, man, welcome to the pod. Glad to have you on the pod. I don't know. I'm trying to figure it all out right now, the pod. Anywho, bro, it's good to have you on the podcast. So I'm excited for what God is doing through this podcast, and to have you a part of it is really an honor, and it's a blessing. Real quick, though, dude, you're new to TWC. You're new on staff here.
Yeah.
So you've been here for, gosh, just a few months, or how long has it really been?
3 months.
3 months.
Yeah.
So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and let you take over for a second. Explain who you are, who is Evan Havens, what do you do here, like all of that good stuff. Whatever you want to share,
Okay.
ball's in your court.
Yeah, so I grew up in a family of a ton of kids. I'm the oldest in my family, 9 kids. And so, man, that just is a lot of crazy in itself.
Yeah.
But my parents raised us in the church, and so I've been, I asked Christ to be my Lord and Savior when I was 4 years old. My dad baptized me when I was 4 years old.
Right on, dude.
And life's definitely had its up and downs, but really lived for him ever since.
Yeah.
Started going to church when I was a baby, but really took ownership of it when I was about 18.
Yeah.
And I went to a new church, and at this new church, I started hearing people praying in tongues. And at first I was thinking, what are they doing?
Yeah. Are they speaking in Spanish? What's going on?
I've never heard this language. But man, God tugged on my heart.
Yeah.
And so I got filled with the Holy Spirit when I was 18, and actually met my wife around that time as well. She was at the church that we had started going to, and kept serving in ministry.
Yeah.
Doing music ministry, playing guitar. That was like the giftings that I had, and so I was using it for the Lord. And just kept growing until about 7 years ago, I got offered a position in full-time ministry as an associate pastor.
That's cool.
And didn't know what I was doing, and still don't sometimes.
Like all of us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But man, I learned a lot, and kept learning and kept growing.
Come on.
And so this summer, God starts speaking to my wife and I. We had gone through some tragedy in our family.
Yeah.
And just we felt this shift. And when we started feeling the shift, my wife had been feeling it for a while, and she had been telling me some different things.
Yeah.
And I would tell her things like, unless God writes on the wall, we're not doing anything different than we're doing right now, right? Yep. Loyalty is a big deal to me, and I wanted to be loyal to the season that we were in, and really what was happening in our lives. So listen to your wives, guys. It's a good idea. But she starts telling me these things, and I'm like, no, unless God writes on the wall. And so through a series of events, God begins to write on the wall.
Yeah.
For us, and he tells us, step out. And I knew what that meant. It meant I needed to resign from a job that I loved, and step away from that position in ministry.
Yeah.
And so I had no idea what was going to come next. Really no clue what God was going to do in my family until we actually did it.
Yeah.
And so I remember thinking, I wrote a resignation letter on a Monday, and it was just like almost surreal. Like I like this place. I like these people.
Right.
Know? And so I wrote it out, and I was like, I'll give it in a week. I'll give it some time. But God was so strong with me. He was so clear to me that I ended up bringing it the next day to work and turning it in.
Yeah.
And so they were asking me, well, are you going to be in ministry still? And I said, I don't know. They said, are you still going to go to church here? I said, I don't know.
Yeah.
I said, all I know is that God has clearly called us to step out. And so my wife and I were in agreement. We stepped out, and then we began to pray, well, God, is this still going to be our church?
Come on.
I don't know.
Yeah.
We're just following the Lord. And
Yeah.
so that was kind of a separate conversation. I'd given, a longer notice just so they could have time to fill the position. And so we had about 5 weeks to kind of prepare and figure out what we were going to do.
Right.
So I start pursuing a job that I had found just it'd be a business, working for a business in town. And I knew people that worked there, and it felt great. Like,
Yeah.
I'm applying, and I got an interview.
Come on, dude.
Like, feeling good. Like, God, this is what you want me to do. Like,
Yeah.
this is exciting. Going to be doing all these new things and learning new things. And so as I start to step out and start taking these steps, like, God's just leading me down this path.
Yeah.
And it was smooth flow, and it was easy. Got to a third interview, and took the interview. I thought it went great. I'm like, this is awesome. The lady talked about my brother, and she's like, I know your brother. He's here sometimes. We love your brother. And I'm like, yes. Like,
right.
Like, this is it,
Yep.
And so I went away from the interview, and same time, my wife and we let our kids pray too with us. Like, they loved our church, We let them pray. Like, you guys pray and ask the Lord what he wants us to do.
Right.
And my daughter, my oldest daughter, she was 8, and she was just devastated at the thought of leaving the church. She loved it. She loved her friends. She loved her pastor, all those things.
Sure.
And so we sit down one morning as a family, and we're like, it's time to decide. And my wife and I had talked the night before, and we knew, like, this isn't going to be our church anymore. And so we asked our kids, hey, we asked you guys to pray. What did you hear God say? And one of the most confirming things that's happened in this whole transition season for us was that she said, God wants us to go to a different church, Dad. And we still don't know where that church would be. But she said, I think there might be people at a different church that don't know Jesus very well, and we need to be the ones to tell them about him. And it was like, my daughter's hearing the voice of God tell her to do something that she doesn't want to do, and she's willing to walk in obedience.
Yeah.
And so, man, that was so confirming to us. My wife and I were hearing the same things. My son was hearing the same thing. Our 4-year-old, we're doing our best with her. And so it was like, okay, God's speaking to us. He's speaking to our kids. And so we went in that day. That was a Thursday before my last Sunday.
Yeah.
And we told them, we're going to be moving on, and we don't know where yet, but we know the Lord has something different for our family, and we love you guys. And it was, we left well.
Right.
No hard feelings. We want to keep relationship, all of that sort of stuff. It's all about the body of Christ.
Yeah.
And because God steps you into a new season doesn't mean what happened in the old season is invalid.
100%.
God moved in your heart, and those people meant something to you. And so we wanted to keep the relationship. So that was Thursday. Friday, I get a call that I did not get the job that I wanted to have.
Yeah.
And I was a little devastated.
Sure.
I mean, I've been trusting God this whole time, been walking with God, and I felt like that's what God wanted me to do.
Yeah.
I felt like God had me on this path, and I had prematurely thought, this job's mine.
Yeah.
Like, God's called me to this. This is what we're going to be doing. And so I was disappointed. And not that I questioned God, I knew he had a plan. And I knew for sure, because I'd heard his voice, the writing on the wall, when he told us to leave, I knew he had a plan.
Yeah.
But I thought that's what his plan was. And so there's that level of disappointment, right? And so I remember we were actually in Ruidoso when I got the call, and I'm sitting on the patio overlooking this beautiful mountain scenery, and just had this moment of a little bit of doubt, a little bit of confusion, you know? I'm still on the porch, and one of the people who I'd gone to church with for years, 12 or 13 years, had started coming to the worship center at the beginning of the year. And he puts me in a group text with himself, me, and then Pastor Shane, which if you're not part of TWC family, Pastor Shane's the executive pastor at the church. Really amazing man of God.
Yeah.
And so and what he says in the group text, he says, hey, Evan, Shane, he says, you guys are both kingdom-minded men. Y'all should have a conversation. Y'all should talk to each other. And I'm sitting there reading this text like, this is the most awkward thing that I've ever been a part of. Like, what do I even say?
Yep.
But luckily, and now knowing Pastor Shane, I see this is him, but he's obviously the first one to reach out.
Right.
And so he texts in the group. He's like, I'd love that. Let's get coffee. And I'm like, okay.
All right, man. Sounds good.
Sounds great. And so he ends up, he's like, we schedule it. Like, let's do Monday at 9.
Yeah.
So I work my last day at the church. We do. My family is there, both services, and we get to kind of say goodbye to the friends and the people we've done life with, and for all of these years. We'd attended the church. My wife had attended the church 21 years, and I'd attended for 19.
Wow.
So, I mean, ever since I was a teenager.
So you've known,
yeah, huge part of our life.
Yeah.
And so it's sad to leave for sure. And Shane, that was Sunday, and then I came in to meet with Pastor Shane on Monday. And he told me, he's like, just come up to the office. I'm like, well, okay. And he was going to bring coffee for me. So we get together, and I walk in, and he has Pastor Jimmy. He's on staff here too, of course. And I'd worked with him at the other church that we were at. He had been the youth pastor, and I was a youth leader for a time.
Wow.
And so Pastor Jimmy and I had known each other for years.
Yeah.
And so he's like, hey, I invited Jimmy to come in, and he's going to talk with us since you guys know each other. I'm like, okay, that's great. And then your father, Pastor Todd, comes in, and he sits down too. And I'm like, this is like all the people.
Yeah.
And so we start this conversation, and at first, I mean, I'm thinking this whole time, like, how am I getting to sit down with the senior pastor of this church that I don't know these people at all?
Yeah.
I've never been a part of this church, this organization. I have no stock here. And he's willing to sit down with me, and really, he loved on me.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Blessed our family and just took care of us. And it was just this like moment of, we had experienced brokenness because of the tragedy we experienced in our family. And he kind of saw that and like pastored me, even though he wasn't my pastor yet.
Yeah.
So automatically I'm just thinking, man, this guy's amazing.
Right.
So I don't know what this conversation's about. I don't think they do either. Just the guy in the church had set it up. And so we start talking about the church.
Yeah.
My wife and I had sat down, and we had talked about 5 things that we're looking for in a church. And we were looking for a church that was all about community, that community was important to them, that they wanted to build community, grow community. We were looking for a church that's kingdom-minded. So we're not just building this church. We want to build the whole kingdom.
Yep.
We were looking for a church that was spirit-led, not just spirit-filled. So, you have a lot of spirit-filled churches, but is a church spirit-led? Are you being led by the Spirit of God in your services, or are you stuck to your structure?
Yep.
We were looking for a church that preached the word. And that was something that we had in our church that we came from. Our pastor preached the word with unwavering conviction.
Yeah.
So we needed that. Yeah. We don't want to be fed, this is what historians say, or 100%. We wanted the word of God. And then we wanted a church that had a strong discipleship community within the kids ministry.
Come on.
That it's not just babysitting, not just coloring pages. Like, our kids need to be exposed to the gifts of the Spirit. Right. Our kids need to have services that they're Spirit-led too.
Yeah.
And so those 5 things. And so I start to talk like, hey, honestly, I guess I want to know about this church. We're looking for a church.
Yeah.
So I started asking your dad, Pastor Shane, is this what this church is all about? And they were just so kind and gave examples of things that had happened recently. And they just walked us through, like, this is what this church is all about. And so we start to realize the worship center is all about those 5 things that we're looking for. And it's almost like God had dropped that seed in my wife and I, our hearts.
Right.
So that when we got here and heard, it sparked something in us.
Come on.
It identified with us because we had been talking about it. And God was putting those seeds because he knew where he was going to bring us.
Yeah.
And so Pastor Shane, we finished up our conversation. They talked to me for like 2 hours.
Yeah.
And I think at the end of the conversation, I was in tears, and I was like, honestly, like, who am I to get your time?
Yeah.
You don't know me. And your dad said, dude, we want to bless you. We want to take care of you. He said, I don't care if you ever come to church here. I don't care if I ever see you again, because you're a man of God, and you're part of the kingdom of God, and we take care of each other. That's what we do. And it was just like this light bulb went off in me, like, this is what we're looking for. Right?
Yeah.
And so we came to church the next Sunday, came to West Campus. Yep. A little overwhelmed. It's very big here. There's a lot of people.
There's a lot that goes on.
There's a lot that happens. Crazy. But man, it's incredible.
Yeah.
And from the worship to the word and this is right before your dad went on sabbatical.
Yeah.
And so it was one of his last Sundays before. And just his passion and the fire and the altar ministry with the gifts of the Spirit flowing, of prophecy, and our kids, they like the playground. That was the first thing they liked.
Come on,
come on!
It's a playground.
It's a playground church. Let's do it, man. And it was incredible. And so we start to realize, like, there's something special about this place.
Right.
So Pastor Shane told me, he said, hey, check it out, and then I want to take your family to lunch.
Yeah.
And so he takes our whole family to lunch, and he said something like, do you want Dave & Buster's or Taco Villa? And I'm like, honestly, man, with the kids, Taco Bell is going to be a little easier.
Yeah, yeah.
They have the playground that's shut in with the glass behind. That's what we're looking for.
Yep.
And so we went to Taco Villa, and he offered me a job, and I was blown away.
Yeah.
Because he didn't know me. All he knew was that Pastor Jimmy knew me, and some other people at the church. But I'm like, how did I get this?
Right.
You know, what did I do to earn or to deserve a spot on your staff?
Yeah.
And what your dad ended up telling me was it's sowing and reaping.
Exactly.
When you sow in ministry and you sow doing it right.
Yep.
And even in leaving the right way.
Yep.
When you sow working your hardest, when you sow, that's the principle of sowing and reaping in the Bible.
Yep.
And so your dad told me, he said, you've had a seasons of sowing and now it's a season of reaping. And he had told me that the Holy Spirit had just highlighted me to them.
Yeah.
And what he wanted to do in me and my family and at the church. And so being here for the last 3 months, our lives are completely different.
Come on.
Because there's something about this place. And you know, the vision of the church, restoring people back to their original God-given design.
Come on.
I feel like that's happening in us.
Yeah.
Even being on staff.
Yeah.
That because of the relationships, because of the people, because of what the Holy Spirit's doing in us, we're doing what God's called us to do. We're 100%. Learning, man, what's our identity in Christ?
Yeah. And
God put us on the earth for good works.
Right.
That he prepared in advance that we should walk in them, right? And so that's what's happening right now. Right. And so it's been incredible. And I've loved getting part of the staff, getting to know everybody. Like I feel like I'm home, you know?
Come on.
And so it's been a season of incredible transition, hard times, wondering what are we going to do next?
Yeah.
I mean, almost feeling like when the Lord called us to step out, it's like what he told Abraham, just leave your family and go, start walking.
Right.
And that's what we did. And to see God orchestrate all of this and his timing and leading me down the path of working for that business.
Come on.
Only to, at the last minute, that not to work out so that this was dropped in my lap.
Right.
And I see that now. Though that time spent on that balcony in Ruidosa, frustrated and questioning, God that whole time was like, I've got it. Trust me, I've got you.
Yeah.
I know exactly what I'm going to do on Monday, right?
Yeah.
And so even just that confirmation of course we can trust God. Because he has our best interest at heart.
100%.
Because he has plans that are good for us, plans not to harm us, plans to give us a hope and a future, right?
Yeah. And
we've seen that in action. So I didn't work anywhere for 6 weeks.
That's scary.
My last day at the and I've got 3 kids. We got to feed those guys. You know what I'm talking about. But for 6 weeks I didn't work, and we had a couple that had gone to the church before, and we hadn't been like in contact with them really for several months.
Sure.
They sent us money. They're like, hey, we heard you guys stepped out and God told us to do this. Like, okay, wow, that's amazing. We had some family members that live out of state. They're like, hey, we heard what's going on, and they sent us money.
Come on, dude.
Then I had this job. I can do some woodworking stuff, and somebody's like, hey, I'll pay you this to build a shelf for us.
Yeah.
And so built a shelf, and they paid me really well for it.
Yeah.
And so at the end of the 6 weeks period, I'm getting ready to start at the worship center.
Yeah.
And I calculate all the money that we had been given and earned over that 6 weeks period. And it was within $4 of what I would have earned if I just would have stayed at the church.
Bro.
And God was like, it was like this moment of, you took care of us.
Yeah.
Like you told me to step out. You provided a job. You provided a new church.
Come on.
You provided for my family. You provided the word to my kids to say, you need to move, you need to go. He provided the financing. And, you know, we like saved an emergency fund. I didn't have to dip into it at all.
Yeah.
Because God took care of us that whole season. And it was like, of course God does that.
Right.
Of course God takes care of us. And of course we can trust him.
Right.
And I think for us, what this has done has been another one of those, another one of those stones of remembrance.
Yeah.
That, you know, the Lord told Joshua, set them up when you cross the Jordan.
Yep.
That I look back on this time and I'll never doubt that God will take care of me. I'll never doubt that if God tells me to do something, you step out in faith and you do it, and he'll walk you through it.
Come on. Bro, 2 things there out of the story that you shared. Number one, I'm glad you're here. Like, bro, it's worked out so well. You're freaking amazing. Your wife's amazing. Your kids are amazing. What God's just been doing, it's been tremendous. And so it's been a blessing to have you here. But the 2 things that I get out of what you're saying in that whole entire story is, number one, intimacy with the Lord. And then 2, history with the Lord.
Yeah.
You know, if you don't have intimacy with the Lord, then you don't have history with the Lord,
Right.
because you don't even know what a relationship with the Lord looks like. And so overall, throughout this whole entire process, throughout your years since you were 4 years old, giving your life to the Lord, being raised in the church, no matter if life was heading up or life was heading down, you still knew no matter what, God is my backbone. God is what I'm falling back on. God, if you led me before, then you're going to lead me here. You're going to lead me through this. You're going to lead me there. And it made me think, honestly, of Moses. Whenever Moses was faced with the Red Sea, it would have been so much easier for God just to remove the Red Sea, but he didn't remove the Red Sea. What he did was he parted the Red Sea and he made a way through the Red Sea. Good. And so it's one of those things that we can sit here, God, remove the problem. God, would you take this way? God, would you? And he's like, I'm not going to take it away, but I am going to provide a way.
Yeah.
And he provided the way through it. And on the other side, there's so much history that you had at the Lord that whenever the storm, whenever the sea was all around you, whenever you felt, how am I going to make it through? How am I going to do this? God still made a way through, met you on the other side, and he's still providing for you to this day.
Oh, yeah.
What I love is in all of that, it's not just setting you up for the long haul, but it's creating legacy and history even for your kids.
Yeah.
That your kids got to see, okay, what's it look like for mom and dad to be faithful in one of the hardest times of their life, not knowing where we're going to go, not knowing how to do this. But the other side of it too is what I love is the fact that your daughter and your son, and then Abigail, sweet Abigail, she's just probably like,
what's going on?
I'm all for the ride.
Yeah.
But your two kids, like, you've done such a great job raising them and giving them to the Lord that they've developed their own intimacy with the Lord to the point where they were even able to, in a way, pastor you, you know?
Yeah, that's
and
true.
So it's just crazy to me because I think so many times that we try to make these moves and we try to do things without having any intimacy with the Lord. And if we can learn to process with the Lord rather than processing with the world, it would have been easier for you. Like here's you have friends all around you. You could have went, hey, what do you think? Hey, what do you think? Hey, should I do this? Hey, should I go over here? And they may have had good advice. Sure. I'm not discounting what they were going to say, but no one's going to know you better and no one's going to know the plan better than the one who's going to give you the plan and give you the vision and get you there all together. So in that, would you just kind of go into just a little bit of what does it mean to have history with the Lord?
Yeah.
But also, I mean, we talked about getting here. You talked a little bit about the confirmations. Mm-hmm. But for someone out there that may be in transition, because I think for some people, we don't always realize that all transition with God is promotion.
Yeah.
All transition with God. Every transition, keyword, with God is promotion.
That's good.
But how do you maintain a level of intimacy? Because I'm sure there were times whenever you had that gut-wrenching feeling like, what am I going to do? Like, I don't know where I'm going. I don't know how to do this.
Yeah.
So how do you maintain intimacy? And if you don't mind, even maybe sharing, if you would like, what did your prayer time with the Lord look like? Was it, Lord, I don't know what you're going to do? Or was it always, Lord, thank you for what you're doing? Like, to what level of vulnerability did you get with the Lord? And then what is that? How does that translate into history with the Lord?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And a subject I'm actually excited to talk about.
Yeah.
So that wasn't the first time that I heard God tell me to step out in faith and obey and see him move.
Yeah.
So I already had history with the Lord. When I was, I was 18, 17, and I was graduating high school. The way my parents took care of us, they bought us a car.
Come on.
They bought me a car. And it was an 89 Oldsmobile Cutlass Sierra. Dude, it had like the bench seat. It had the speedometer that's like this big. And, I was a little embarrassed to drive that car.
Did Kelsey, whenever you guys rode in the car, did she sit like next to you? Did you pull the whole?
So we weren't dating yet. She didn't get the Cutlass experience,
sorry,
fortunately. Fortunately, she got the next car experience.
The next car.
I'll tell you about that one. So, but their rule was my parents, we'll buy you a car when you're 16. It's going to be as old as you are, but we'll buy you one. But when your brother turns 16, the car belongs to him and you're on your own. So I was graduating high school. I graduated when I was 17 and I went to college at South Plains. Yeah. South Plains is in Levelland. I live in Lubbock. So there's really no way to get there besides you got to drive, right? And so Jordan turned 16 at that time. And so they took my keys away and gave them to him.
Yeah.
And I've got nothing. And I'm signed up for classes. And it was like, I think 2 weeks away. I have no money.
Yeah.
I'm like, what do I do? Yeah. And so I start praying to the Lord, like, God, you got to provide something for me. I don't know what to do.
Right.
My mom has told me this story later in life that she was praying at the same time. And she said she was this close to just taking out a loan and buying me a car. Like, that's my son, and I want to provide for him. And she said that God told her, do not do that.
Yeah.
You told him that he needed to get his own, like, you stick with what you said. And so she was like, but it's my son, and I want to take care of him. Well, ended up, I'm praying, I'm asking God, a week before I'm supposed to go to college in South Plains, a guy from our church calls me and says, hey, man, God's been speaking to me for a while. Haven't obeyed yet, and I'm really sorry for that, but I want to give you my Jeep. And he says, I'll be over later today with the keys.
What?
And he literally drove to my house, dropped off this Jeep Grand Cherokee.
Yeah.
It's still to this day the favorite car I've ever owned. It's a 92 model, I think.
Come on.
And I loved that car. I wrecked it, unfortunately. It's sad.
How long did you have it, though?
Probably 5 or 6 years.
Okay, so you got a little bit of life out of it.
I got it. But man, that car meant so much to me because not like I really appreciate the guy giving it to me, but more than that, it was God gave me that vehicle. And I was able to get the first day of class, and I drove that Jeep all through college, right?
Come on, dude.
And it was God saying, you prayed, you asked, you trusted, and I provided.
Right.
And because of that, I haven't doubted the Lord like with financial provision for me since then.
Sure.
Because I saw it with my own eyes. I got intimate with him. I asked him. I trusted him. I didn't know what else to do. And he came through for me. And now in my life, all of these different moments happen just like that, where, God, how am I going to pay this bill? Oh, a check comes in the mail because our insurance agent had us overpay, and it's just like stuff you're not expecting.
Yeah.
And okay, that's how we're going to pay for it.
Right.
And God coming through over and over and over to where when he tells me to do something big, like you've got a family, a wife, 3 kids to feed, and I'm going to tell you to not have a job for 6 weeks. And I want you to step out in faith and trust me. Okay. Yes, sir.
Come on.
Because of that history, right?
Right.
And you look at Abraham, whenever he stepped out in faith and did what God told him to do when he had him sacrifice his son. And the Bible actually talks about it, says that Abraham arose early the next morning and went on his way. He obeyed quickly. He obeyed quietly. He didn't argue with God. He didn't say, but that's the promise you gave me and now you want to take it from me. No, he obeyed because he had history and he had intimacy with God, just like you're talking about. And then you'll even remember whenever he talks to his servant, he says, hey, you stay here. The boy and I are going to go further up the mountain and we're going to worship. Yeah. And I talk about this a lot. What did that mean? We're going to sing 2 fast songs and 2 slow songs? No, it meant I'm going to go lay down the very promise that God gave me on the altar, and I'm going to sacrifice it to him because he asked me to do it. His worship was an act of surrender and obedience and this lifestyle of, God, I trust you this much. Here.
That's so good.
And you remember what God said to him? Now he said, and surely I'll bless you. And he repeats the promise to him that he had given him in Genesis chapter 12. He says, I'll bless you. I'll make your name great. You'll be blessed to be a blessing. Your descendants will outnumber the stars in the sky, the sand on the seashore, right? And he says, surely I'll do this for you because now I know you fear the Lord. And I think when we step out in those moments of trusting God, even when we don't understand, like everybody's going to have a first time stepping out. You have to build history. So there's going to be a first time. For me, it was praying for a Jeep. Like for you, it may be something different. It may be a move. Yeah. It may be taking your kid out of one school and putting him in another school. I don't know. But when you step out and you obey like Abraham did, God's going to show up. Yeah. He will. He'll never let us down, right? He won't fail. And so whenever God shows up and God shows out, you look back and that's a stone of remembrance for you now. And so the next time, something a little harder, but I'll do it because I trust God. Yeah. And the next time it's something a little harder, but I'll do it because I trust God. Right. And I love that history with the Lord. I love that when you trust him, he comes through for you. Come on. So what would have happened then if my mom would have bailed me out? I would have missed that experience. I would have missed getting to hear God for myself. Yeah. And so it's a message to me now as a father. Right. Like my mom could have bailed me out and that would have been great. And she loves me and she would have done it out of love. Right. But it would have shortchanged what God wanted to do for me. And so now with my kids, I've got to be careful of that too. Sure. Like allowing them to pray in this transition. What that did for them when they were part of the decision making is they got to say, like, I am obeying God. Yeah. Not just my parents are obeying God, but I am. Right. I want to stay at this church, but God's telling me to go to a different one and I'm obeying God. Yeah. And so we start walking with our kids through having their own intimate relationship with the Lord. And I think this is so important, even no matter how young or old your kids are, to give him a foundation of having an intimate relationship with the Lord. I'll take a brief aside here to tell a different story. So the other day, my son loses his necklace at the church here.
Oh, yeah.
And it's a little shark necklace that he got on our trip to Florida. It was very special to him. So he's just bawling his eyes out. And I'm like, buddy, I don't know what to tell you. We looked for it. We couldn't find it. And I said, you just need to pray. Like, ask the Lord to help you find your necklace. And so he's crying, bawling his eyes out. Dear Jesus, please help me find my shark necklace.
Yeah.
And we didn't find it that day. We didn't find it the next day. We didn't find it that week. And so I get this idea like, hey, they may have something similar on Amazon. So I get on Amazon and I see like they've got basically the exact same necklace. It looks exactly the same. And so I show it to him and I say, hey, buddy, God was like speaking to me and he showed me this necklace and we can get this for you. And he was excited, but he's like, it's not the one from Florida, but it looks like it. It's okay, right? And so we buy the necklace and he wears it for a couple weeks. I think this is 4 or 5 weeks after he lost it. I get a text from Ashley. She's cleaning up the kids' playground area. And she tells me, she sends a picture. Is this your son's? I'm like, oh my gosh. And so I take it to him and I'm like, dude, you prayed and not only God gave you this back.
Yep.
Like I looked hard for that necklace in the room that she found it in. I think somebody put it there after. Like
yeah, they did.
Who knows? But this thing turned back up.
Yeah.
And so when I told my mom about it and she was like ecstatic because her and my dad had still been praying for him for 5 weeks. That's cool. God would bring that necklace because that becomes a stone of remembrance for him, right? Yeah. So the other day he loses something else, and it's his giving envelope that he brings to the church to bring his tithe in. Yeah. And he's devastated again. He's crying his eyes out like, I'm worried about my giving envelope is what he said. Yeah. And I'm like, dude, I tell you to put it where it goes. You're supposed to put it where it goes. And so I'm a little frustrated with him, but just feel that whisper from the Lord. Give it to me. Okay. I'm like, buddy, you don't need to be frustrated. You don't need to cry. Just pray. Remember how God found your shark necklace? Ask the Lord. Yeah. And so Levi, he's 6. So he starts praying and he says, tears again, dear Jesus, please help me find my giving envelope. And so I'm like, all right, good job, buddy. And so the last one took 6 weeks or 5 or 6 weeks to come up, And so we're cleaning his room and I'm helping him do stuff. And he comes to me and he goes, Dad, I think my giving envelope is over there. And he points to the corner of his room. And he was like, I was thinking that could just be my own thoughts, but then I put my hands like this, and I know that's God.
Come on, dude.
I'm like, okay.
All right, man.
I sure hope that thing's over there.
Oh, please.
Yes.
It's God.
And so I'm like, okay, it's over there. And so we go over to the corner of his room, and he's got a bunch of backpacks over there, and I'm opening his backpacks and empty them out. I open this little red backpack that he has, dump it out, giving envelope on the floor.
Wow.
And I'm kind of blown away. I'm like, dadgum, man.
What?
This giving out. So I'm like, dude, you heard from God. Like you heard God speak to you and he told you where that was. The Holy Spirit spoke to you. Right. And now he's got those memories, those times, and he's learning to trust the Lord. Oh. He heard the Lord speak to him at Encounter Night the other night and told him to get baptized. Yeah. So he like spontaneously got baptized. He wasn't prepared to. He jumped in there in his clothes, man, and surrendered his life to the Lord. And those things are like special moments for me as a father, but it's building something in him, just like it did in me when the white Jeep, right? Yep. Just like it built something in me, it's building something in Levi, building something in Ellie. Pretty soon it'll be building something in Abigail. And I think oftentimes as parents, I get into this trap a lot. We think, I've got to manufacture these things so that they get close to God. No, you don't. God is their God too. Come on. God doesn't have grandchildren. Like they're children of God just as much as I am. 100%. And if I trust that God's real and he really speaks, then he will really speak to my kids. Yeah. And dude, this season, he's done that for all my kids. Yeah. And it's been really, really cool. Yeah. As far as with intimacy with the Lord, that plays in huge too. Because history of the Lord, I think you said, it doesn't come unless you have intimacy with the Lord. Yeah. Like if you're not going to get on your knees and ask him those questions, then he can't answer them for you. Right. And then he may be blessing you, but you don't know it's from him. Yep. Right. So intimacy is so important. Yeah. And I know that your mom has been speaking into my life, even the short time I've been here, about that intimacy with the Lord. I think she really champions that. Because
she's something else.
She is.
My mom, she's like, that woman's so intimate with the Lord that she's getting up at 3, 4 in the morning to go and pray. And I'm like, man, Lord ain't called me to do that yet. Thank God. But no, I'm just kidding. But I mean, really that intimacy with the Lord, that's what she's big on. So
Yeah. That's a heritage too. Legacy for your family.
Right.
My mom's like that as well. I remember I'd get up to like go to the bathroom middle of the night when I was a kid or a teenager. And I can't tell you how many times I'd see my mom with their Bible open and she's got worship music playing on the TV.
Yeah.
Like, man, mom's spending time with Jesus, right? And so I think too many times we only spend time with Jesus when we need something from him.
Yeah, dude, come on.
Like God, I'm gonna pray today because I don't know what to do in this situation. I need direction.
Right.
Or God, I'm gonna pray today because that person made me mad and I don't want my heart to get sick. God, I'm going to pray to you today because our finances are struggling. I don't know where my next meal is going to come from. Should you pray in each one of those circumstances? Absolutely. Yeah. But can you imagine like a friend relationship or a spouse relationship where the only time you communicated or had intimacy was when you needed something?
Yeah.
That's not a relationship that works or lasts.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so I think intimacy for everybody looks different. What does it look like for you?
Bro, honestly, like, so being raised in the church, being a pastor's kid, I knew all the Bible stories.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you're raised to know them.
Yeah.
You are raised to know the Bible stories. You're raised to know about Jonah and the well, raised to know about Daniel in the lion's den, David, all these different things. And I think if we're not careful, like, for me, I know this much, like, oh, okay, you know what? Let me take it this route. Let me put it this way.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to laugh at me. But I remember growing up as a pastor's kid and knowing it was, oh gosh, I want to say I was 12 years old whenever I felt like I'm called to go into ministry. Maybe younger, maybe 9.
Yeah.
But I wanted to be a pastor. Now, of course, at that time, I also wanted to be a handful of other things. I wanted to be a police officer. I wanted to be in WWE. And I wanted to be a basketball. And then for some odd reason, I wanted to be a tow truck driver too. I was watching Lizard Lick Towing at the time.
There you go, man.
I liked watching the guy's name. I think his name's Bobby. He'd always go beat up the people that were being mean to him. And I'm like, man, that's cool.
I want to do that.
But I remember like growing up, I would always sit here and think like, well, I don't have a testimony. I don't do anything bad. I've never got involved with alcohol. I've never got involved with drugs. I don't have one. Like, no one's going to want to listen to me. Why don't I have a testimony? And what, like, I slowly began to realize was I started making an idol out of those things, and I didn't really have a good relationship with the Lord. Out of relationship, I had it more based out of religion and what I knew about the Lord, not really knowing the Lord. And for some of us, I think we know about the Lord and we don't really know the Lord.
Yeah.
And a couple years ago, man, I went through a really, really hard season. If you've listened to any of the other episodes, you guys heard it, but I took 3 months away from ministry. And dude, my heart was shattered. My heart was crushed. I didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't know if I was going to come back. Didn't know what it was going to look like. And it wasn't knowing any of the scriptures and knowing about grace and mercy that helped me through. It was whenever I was able to turn my mind off, for lack of better terms, shut my mouth, and listen to the Lord. One of the most intimate times with the Lord that I have ever had was whenever in those 3 months, we actually own a t-shirt shop here at the church. And it's a screen printing shop. And so I'm washing screens. I had my headphones in and I'm listening to music and it's on shuffle and it comes across this worship song. And I'm sitting there and I'm washing the screens and everything. And I start just bawling. And I just remember asking the Lord, like, what happened?
Yeah.
And for the first time since everything had happened, that whole first month, dude, that I was away, I wasted time. I was mad. I was angry. I was bitter. And I wasted a whole month. So this is in the second month. And I just, Lord, what happened?
Yeah.
Where were you in this situation? What can I do? And it was getting raw and getting vulnerable and shedding some tears and letting some things out and really talking to the Lord about this is how I feel right now.
Yeah.
You know, when you know that you're growing in your relationship with God, it's whenever you can take the real things and lay it down at his feet.
You don't have to hide or pretend.
Exactly. That you can realize that he already knows.
Yeah.
Like, you're not keeping anything from him that he don't already know. So, you know what I'm saying? But it's one of those things that for me, sometimes my conversations with the Lord are like, Lord, I don't like this right now. And you're the one that started this and you put this into motion.
Yeah.
So God, I need you to make a way. I need you to show me, and I need you to help me through this. You know, I was scrolling through TikTok, and dude, TikTok is a black hole, let me tell you. But I got on one of these videos, and it was a scene from The Chosen. And I don't remember which disciple it was, but he's on his knees and he's just bawling, and he's like, I don't understand. And Jesus looks at him and he goes, I know you don't understand. But if you can just get to a spot to remember that all these things are happening according to the will of my Father, so that everything can come to pass that I have for you, it's going to get better. Yeah. And I think when you can get to a spot and you spend so much time with him, telling him the real things, having a conversation like this. Yeah. This is truly what the Lord desires, is real relationship and conversation. Not this whole idea that we made it out to be, that prayer and talking to God is only whenever we need something. It's, hey man, this is how my day's going. Oh, yeah. You know, having a good, genuine conversation. And so for me, it starts with viewing him more as a dad than just viewing him as a God. Yeah. I think that, yes, we should recognize him as God. We should recognize the fear of the Lord, a healthy fear. Yeah. But at the same time, don't steal the joy of the Father from being a father to you. Yeah. And I think whenever I started viewing it that way, of realizing that really God didn't have it out to get me, I think what we forget and what we sit here and say so quickly, if we're not careful, is I'm where I'm at because God did this and God did that. Now, two different perspectives. One, you can have a bad perspective on that. I'm here because God did this. Or you're like, thank God that I'm here because God did this. You know, we're living in a season right now where all these crazy exposings and everything like that are happening. And I choose to have a different perspective on it, that rather than being upset with the Lord for the exposing, it's thank God that he exposed it. That's a different level of intimacy and relationship that the Father wants with you. So much relationship where he has so much love and desire to be in a relationship with you that he's willing, if you're not willing to remove it, he's willing to remove the thing that's keeping you apart from him. That's good. And when you can get to a spot of realizing that everything that God does is for the relationship that he wants with you and the love that he has for you, then that's when things get better and things get easier. The issue is whenever we don't spend time with him and we don't stay near him, then we don't know his character. Yep. And because we don't know his character, you see, the enemy can't create, he can only replicate. Mm-hmm. And he's real good at sounding like Jesus and telling us about 80% of the truth. And then the other 20% is where we get in trouble. Yep. Right. But if you can learn to spend time with the Lord, learn his character, go read the book of John. I just told someone yesterday, I was actually in Brownfield for RSM, and I told one of the students, go read the book of John. Well, why? Man, you're going to learn more about Jesus and that. Like, yes, the whole Bible. Go read the whole Bible if you can. But the book of John perfectly demonstrates and illustrates exactly who Jesus is and the fullness of who he is on both the God side and the human side. Yeah. You get to see Jesus in the complete human form of he went through some stuff. He knows what it's like to feel betrayal. He knows what it's like to feel anxiety, depression, physical pain, emotional pain, spiritual pain. He knows what it's like to ask God, like, hey, if there's any other way, like, it's not just us. Right. And I think whenever you can get to a spot of realizing and taking away this idea that, how do I say it? Like God, I think our idea of God is what culture says that God should be, and what culture said over the course of time is like a golden calf down on your knees, and you're sitting here and you're bowing down to your hand. Yeah. Like, yes, does the Lord want to be worshiped? 100%, but he also desires relationship. There's two different kinds of worship, like what you said. I love how you put that. Worship can look like 2 fast songs and 2 slow songs, and we're getting on to the message. Yeah. Or it can look like getting down on our knees and fully surrendering to the Lord. And good. What that truly looks like, that surrender to the Lord, is honestly, in my head, it's sitting there next to the Lord on a park bench and saying, Jesus, this is what I've been struggling with and I need your help. Wow. I'm ready to let this go. That's good. And when you can view it like that, that's when things start to shift and change. Oh, yeah. So long story short. Yeah. Yeah.
I love that. I love that. Do you think, do like a little bit of practical, what does intimacy with the Lord look like? Maybe someone's like, I don't know how to be intimate with the Lord. Yeah. I think for me, there's several things and everybody's different. Yeah. Just like everybody's marriage is different. Just like, you know, intimacy in a marriage looks different from this other marriage, but I think that when you get into the Word and you're not just reading it to check off the list, but you're reading the Word to get to know God better, that's a way that you can be intimate with the Lord. And I've had times just kitchen table in the morning before my family's awake, just reading the Word and learning about God, thanking Him for who He is, thanking Him for what He's done. And those have been some incredibly intimate times with Him. I think worship, not just in a corporate setting. You think if you only said intimate things to your wife in a group of people, that's not true intimacy, right? Now, we should worship corporately together. We should do that. But you can worship in your bedroom. You can worship in your living room, whatever. And you don't even have to be a musician or a singer.
Yeah.
Just express to God how good He is. Express like praise to Him.
Yeah.
And that's why you can be intimate with Him as well.
You know, in that, because you brought up your spouse, and I just listened to this podcast, and he said it perfectly on the podcast. They were talking about intimacy with your spouse, and he said, sometimes more intimacy with your spouse doesn't mean more time in the bedroom or more sex. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it means just more communication.
Yeah.
And so before your mind goes to the physical, maybe you can go over here and just have talk, communication. And he said, I love this part. I'm not married, so I can't speak to this. You probably can. But even in translation with our relationship with the Lord, what he says in this podcast, he goes, look, if you can learn to have effective communication with your spouse, then you're probably going to have more sex on the other side, because you're serving her in more ways than just one way.
Yeah.
You're serving her of, hey, how can I serve you? Hey, how can I do this? Hey, what can I do to help you today? And he said, the other side is there's going to be more intimacy in the bedroom. In our relationship with God. When you can learn to really communicate, be real, be raw, be vulnerable. Yeah. What PT says is honest, open, and transparent with the Lord.
Yeah.
Out of that, then you get to see the Lord do more and more out here.
Right.
Whenever you, what you do in private will eventually come out in public. So if you're spending time with the Lord in private, then you're going to start to see the miracles and the fruition of some of these desires of your heart out here in public. Right?
Yeah.
It's principle again of what you said earlier, sowing and reaping.
Right.
What are you sowing in private?
Well, and that's so good, because I think people look at another person sometimes and like, oh, I wish I was as close to the Lord as that. Maybe it's somebody giving a prophecy, or it's somebody that's really anointed in worship, and they're just taking us all into the presence of God, right? And they're like, oh, I wish I could. Well, you don't know the hours and hours that person spends in their bedroom on their knees that nobody else but them and God will ever know about,
100%.
Right? And it's about spending time with Him. In Jeremiah 29:13, it says, you will seek me and find me when you seek me with all of your heart.
Come on.
And in Revelation, it talks about how Jesus is knocking on the door of our heart. And it says, if anyone will just open the door and let me in, then I'll come in and I'll sit with you and I'll dine with you.
So good.
And it's an invitation to all of us, right?
Right.
And then in James 4:8, he says, draw close to me and I'll draw close to you. Yeah. So we have all of these invitations from God, right? None of those are promises to everyone, but each one is an invitation to everyone. Yeah. If you will draw close to me, you will experience my closeness. Yeah. If you will just open the door of your heart, I'll come in and be your friend. If you will seek me with everything you've got, you're going to find me, right? There are these if-then statements, but those are all about intimacy. And so when we spend time praying in our bedroom, when we come up to like this transition, I wouldn't have been able to recognize the voice of God speaking to me that it was time to move if I didn't have a relationship with Him, right? I wouldn't know what He sounded like. Yep. And so those intimate times where it's just you and God, they're so important, and we have to make time for it.
Yep.
Our schedule is going to fill up
easily,
right? It happens by itself.
Yep.
You don't just stumble across a great relationship with God.
Yeah.
You put it on your daily schedule.
Right.
I'm going to wake up earlier so I can spend this time with God. Or instead of eating a lunch today, I'm going to go and sit in my truck and spend this time with God. Or as soon as my kids go to bed, I'm going to take time away and I'm going to go and worship and I'm going to pray and I'm going to read the Word. But it's got to be scheduled. I like to say, make an appointment with God and keep it.
Well, you do the things that you want to do.
Yeah.
Like if you want to do something today or tomorrow or this, I promise you, more than likely, you are going to go do what you want to do because it's a priority.
Right.
So same thing with your relationship with God. You just got to prioritize it. Last thing, because I know we're running out of time, but let's go back to your story and your transition.
Mm-hmm.
And let's say you don't have any intimacy with the Lord.
Yeah.
You're transitioning. This opportunity comes knocking. You don't know the voice of God. It looks good.
Mm-hmm.
It's a good idea. It's a good thing, man. That looks really, really good. But just because something's a good thing doesn't always mean that it's a God thing.
That's right.
So not every good thing can be a God thing, but every God thing can be a good thing.
Come on, Pastor.
And it comes back down to the intimacy that you have with the Lord. Now, thank God that you heard the Lord and he's like, hey, man, we're going to transition you over here, because I'm like, come on, somebody.
TWC.
It's freaking amazing. I love it. But then again, like, be very, very careful that whenever you are transitioning or you're looking for something or whatever it is, whether that's a job, whether that's a relationship, that's a new hobby, like whatever, it can be anything. Remember these words, that just because it's a good thing does not mean that it's a God thing.
Yeah.
Again, that fruit looked really good. Yeah. Freaking Eve.
Had to go mess it all up. And I'll just say, about that it'll come on both sides. And I remember a season I was in a job for 5 years that I did not like.
Yeah.
I had gone to college to do this job, and I thought I would love it, and I did not. I hated it. But I knew that God had me there, and I knew that it wasn't my time to step out.
Right.
So without the intimacy with the Lord, I would have stepped out of that position early.
Yeah.
Right? And then here at this church, I loved being there. And I had good relationships with people.
Yeah.
And without hearing the voice of the Lord, I wouldn't have stepped out. I would have stayed there.
Yeah.
But either one, I would not be where God wanted me to be.
Right.
I'd be doing what I thought was best.
Yep.
And I can only see this tiny little piece of what God's wanting to do. That job that I stayed in for 5 years, that equipped me with things that I'm still using 10 years later now.
Yeah.
Right? Because God wanted to impart some things into me that I had to go through a difficult season, an uncomfortable season, but he wanted to plant some things into me that would grow so that when I got to the next season, they could start producing fruit. Right. And I'd be prepared and equipped. So in transition, it's so important to listen to the voice of God. And you ask, like, what would it be like if I wouldn't have that intimate relationship with him? I don't know and don't want to know, because it would have been all messed up, right? Yeah. If I'm doing it my way, it's going to be all sorts of messy. But God has this beautiful way of, hey, I want you to stay here. I'm going to equip you. I know it's hard. Stay. Or it's time to go.
Yeah.
And you listen to that whisper and you just know this is God.
Yeah. Come on, dude. Bro, this conversation was like legit and can easily go into a part 2.
Okay.
So you never know. Stick around and you might find yourself on another podcast. We'll call it part 2, because honestly, I think one thing that the people need to hear is the way that you leave one season determines how you enter into the next. And that's what my dad's raised me and taught me. Yeah. So, hey, you guys never know. You might find yourself listening to another podcast with Pastor Evan. But, man, thank you so much for joining us today, being real, being raw, being vulnerable. I'm excited for what God's going to continue to do in your life. I'm glad to be a part of it. I'm glad to be one of your biggest fans, one of your biggest cheerleaders. I'm like, hey, go Evan. But, man, thank you again for being on Corner Talk.
Man, thanks for having me. I really enjoyed this.
Absolutely, man. Well, guys, make sure that you guys like, share, subscribe, all the good things. Invite someone to come listen to this podcast with you guys. But till next time, we love you so much, and we'll see you then.
All right.
Hey everyone, Hunter Turnbow here, and I just wanted to say thank you so much for joining us for Corner Talk Podcast. I hope that it encouraged you and empowered you. Make sure that you guys share this with someone, because hopefully it can encourage them and empower them as well. But till next time, we love you guys so much.